welcome Senator Sessions and Mrs. Sessions. Let me just follow up. You were just asked about Violence Against Women Act and your support. Let's deal with the facts. Let's deal with what was actually voted on. Let's deal with the Violence Against Women Act that you voted against. You strongly oppose the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2013. Spoke against it, you voted against it. That law expanded protections for some of the most vulnerable groups of domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, students, immigrants, LGBTQ victims, and those on tribal lands. Now, the Justice Department, by all accounts, has done an excellent job implementing and enforcing it over the last 3 years. I believe, and we were both prosecutors, I went to a lot of domestic violence scenes, crime scenes, as a young prosecutor. I believe that all victims of domestic and sexual violence deserve protection. Why did you vote against expanding protections for LGBT victims, students, immigrants, and tribal victims of domestic violence and sexual assault? Why did you vote no?
Mr. Chairman, I did indeed support the bill in 2000 and in 2000.
Now, I'm talking about the bill that is the law today.
I understand
the law
what you're
today
saying.
is passed in 2013 by an overwhelming margin in the Senate and by an overwhelming margin in the Republican-controlled House, signed into law by President Obama. I'm asking about that. Why did you oppose it?
Mr. Chairman, a number of people opposed some of the provisions in that bill, not the entire bill.
I'm just asking about you.
I'm trying to answer.
Go ahead.
So when we voted in the committee, 8 of the 9 Republicans voted against the bill. One of the more concerning provisions was a provision that gave tribal courts jurisdiction to try persons who were not tribal members. That's contrary, I believe, the only time that's ever happened. That was the big concern that I raised, I believe, primarily on the legislation. So I voted with the chairman and the legislation he had that I thought did the job for protecting women, to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, but at the same time did not have other things attached to it that I thought were concerning.
Well, on the tribal courts, those have now been prosecuted very carefully. Defendants receive due process rights. They have to. None of the non-Indian defendants who have been prosecuted have appealed to federal courts. Many feel it's made victims on tribal land safer. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with the way the Justice Department has handled such cases?
Mr. Chairman, I do believe that the law has been passed by Congress. I'm interested to see how it plays out in the real world, and I will do my best to make my judgment about how to enforce that as Attorney General. Well, certainly the law itself has many powerful provisions that I'm glad was passed and that is in law and provides protections to women as victims against victims of violence.
On the tribal lands, it's been used and prosecuted for 3 years. Do you feel it's been handled correctly?
Mr. Chairman, I have no understanding of that, but of the results of it so far. I'm interested, first time I've heard it commented on. Let me say this to you directly. In meeting with senators prior to this hearing, I've had quite a number, perhaps more than any other issue, that I learned a lot about, and that is that non-Indians that have been going on to tribal lands and committing crimes, including rape, have not been effectively prosecuted. Now, under current law and historically, they would be prosecuted in the federal government by the United States attorneys, and that has not been happening sufficiently, I am now convinced. So I do think the FBI, particularly maybe the Bureau of Indian Affairs investigators, should be beefed up, and the U.S. attorneys need to do probably a better job of prosecuting cases that need to be prosecuted in federal court.
Those were facts that came out pretty clearly in the hearings before you voted against that provision. That is why Senator Crapo and I and others included it in the bill. But let me, there have not been any tests of that. Nobody's appealed this, nobody's objected to it. But would you be able to, if somebody does, would you be able to defend it in court?
I would defend the statute if it's reasonably defensible. Yes, it's passed by Congress. It would be the duty of the Attorney General, whether they voted for it or support it, to defend it. And now, did I call you Mr. Chairman, a while ago? I think I did. So
well, that's okay.
You've been my chairman many years.
Listen, I spent 20 years back and forth on this. I'm delighted to turn it over to Senator Feinstein and Senator Grassley, but
well, you'll be handling all the money of the United States, I understand, in your new position. In 2009, I offered the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act as an amendment to the defense bill. It extended hate crimes protections to LGBT individuals, women, and individuals with disabilities. It passed the Senate overwhelmingly. You opposed it. You stated at a hearing that you're not sure women or people with different sexual orientations face that kind of discrimination. And then you said, I just don't see it. Do you still believe that women and LGBT individuals do not face the kind of discrimination that the hate crimes legislation was passed to prevent? Mr. Chairman, Senator Leahy, having discussed that issue at some length, that does not sound like something I said or intended to say. What I did intend...
You did say it.
Well, I understand, but I've seen things taken out of context and not give an accurate picture. My view is and was a concern that it appeared that these cases were being prosecuted effectively in state courts where they would normally be expected to be prosecuted. I asked Attorney General Holder to list cases that he had that indicated they were not being properly prosecuted. I noted that Mr. Byrd was given the death penalty in Texas for his offense, and Mr. Shepard, there were 2 life sentences imposed as a result of the situation in his state. So the question simply was, do we have a problem that requires an expansion of federal law into an area that the federal government has not been historically involved? Senator Hatch had a proposal that we do a study to see the extent of the problem, and that we should have evidence that that indicates a shortage of prosecutions and a lack of willingness to prosecute before adding this law.
As far as the study, last year the FBI said that LGBT individuals were more likely to be targeted for hate crimes than any other minority group in the country. I mean, we can study this forever, but that's a pretty strong fact.
Well, I will tell you, Senator.
And in 2010, you stated expanding hate crime protections to LGBT individuals was unwarranted, possibly unconstitutional. You said the bill has been said to cheapen the civil rights movement, especially considering what the FBI has found. Do you still feel that way?
Mr. Chairman, the law has been passed. The Congress has spoken. You can be sure I will enforce it.
Thank you. When you were, well, I don't want to go as much over time as Senator Hatch did, but I'll ask you one question. The president-elect has repeatedly asserted his intention to institute a ban on Muslim immigrants to the United States. In December 2015, you voted against a resolution that I offered in this committee that expressed the sense of the Senate that the United States must not bar individuals from entering into the United States based on their religion. All Democrats, most Republicans, including the chairman, voted in support of my resolution. Do you agree with the President-elect that the United States can or should deny entry to members of a particular religion, based on their religion? I mean, we do background checks for terrorism, but based on their religion. Do you agree with the President-elect the United States can or should deny entry to all members of a particular religion?
Senator Leahy, I believe the President-elect has, subsequent to that statement, made clear that he believes the focus should be on individuals coming from countries that have history of terrorism, and he's also indicated that his policy and what he suggests is strong vetting of people from those countries before they're admitted to the United States.
Then why did you vote against the resolution?
I almost called you Mr. Chairman again. Senator Leahy, my view and concern was, in the resolution, it was suggesting that you could not seriously consider a person's religious views, even and often, sometimes, at least not in a majority, but many people do have religious views that are inimical to the public safety of the United States. I did not want to have a resolution that suggested that that could not be a factor in the vetting process before someone is admitted. But I have no belief and do not support the idea that Muslims as a religious group should be denied admission to the United States. We have great Muslim citizens who've contributed in so many different ways. And America, as I said in my remarks at the occasion that we discussed it in committee, are great believers in religious freedom and the right of people to exercise their religious beliefs.